Well, hello. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Around the Town with Mark. I am Mark Whalen, your host. And yes, I love to say it, and it's true, we're always glad to have you tune in and visit with us. Well, today I'm very excited to have back one of my favorite guests. She's just a terrific lady, and the topic is wonderful, the Avery-Copp House Museum on Thames Street in Groton. So allow me to introduce Leslie Evans, the director of the Avery-Copp House Museum. Leslie, welcome back to Around the Town with Mark.
Well, thanks so much for having me again.
Well, we're delighted to have you back again to talk about the Avery-Copp House Museum, which is such a beautiful destination on Thames Street in Groton. So let's start out by just sort of reviewing again with our viewers. What is the Avery-Copp House?
The Avery-Copp House is a historic house museum, Mark, meaning that it's an old house that's been preserved to make it available to the public to come and see how people lived in a previous time in Groton, learn about Groton history, and do research if they need to do that. And so we're located at 154 Thames Street in Groton. And this is an exciting time of year for us because this is when we start to open for our summer season. Mm-hmm. So we will be open for tours starting on Memorial Day weekend. We're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 11 to 3. And then we're also open for special events throughout the year and also for group tours if people have a group that they belong to that they would like to come for one of our thematic tours or to schedule a special event there. We're always available for that as well.
And I think one of the special things about the Avery-Copp House Museum, and please tell us a little bit about it, is it's a time capsule, but it covers generations or
it really does. It's very interesting in that regard, in that it was built about 1800 on the site of an even older house that once stood there, but it was lived in generation after generation by the same family. So as one generation would inherit it from the previous one, they would not only get the house, but all the contents would remain with it. And it really was great.
Very special, because and I think that's important for our viewers and your visitors to know that it's not just an empty house museum like so many of them are. No, they're going in and they're seeing things, furniture and kitchen items that go back from the 1800 all the way up to the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, really up to the 1950s. And it is not a recreation, and that's what makes it special. Often old houses are saved because maybe they were historically significant or a famous person lived there. But over time, as people live in a house, things wear out or are sold or maybe completely dispersed sometimes. When someone dies, it wasn't unusual to have an auction that would sell all the contents of the house.
Right.
And that happened a lot. And then when the house becomes a museum, you have to recreate what was once in it. But with the Avery-Copp House, we don't have that. We have everything intact inside it. Sometimes maybe we have too many things, I think, because when I first came to work there, I felt kind of overwhelmed by it because there were things from every time period. But gradually you're able to sort them out and make sense of them. And so that's what we've tried to do with our visitors as we take people on a tour through the house. We talk about different time periods and how Groton changed over time and what influences in society were affecting the people that lived in the house. But we've had to try to narrow it down to put our strongest focus on a discrete time period so that we can interpret that. And so the time that we focus on is between the 1890s to the 1930s. And that's when the last family with children lived in the house, and they also had live-in domestic servants there, and so we can tell their story as well. And when people come to see the house, they see it from all those perspectives, from the ground floor all the way up to the third floor where the servants' quarters are. So it's interesting to be able to see what was on view to the public when people would come to visit, and what was going on behind the scenes to make the house operate.
And the house that we see today is pretty much the Victorian version, is it not?
Yes, it was Victorianized, meaning it was changed from being a colonial style house that it started as to a Victorian style house. And that was done because the people living in it at that time wanted to stay on their old family homestead, but they wanted to bring it up to date to the Victorian aesthetic. And so it had things added to it like porches and gingerbread trim and bay windows and things that were in style at that time.
Fortunately, that Victorian exterior of the home didn't change a whole lot and become a 1950s looking house.
It didn't, because we were lucky in that. As historians, we're very grateful because the people who lived there, and especially the last man who lived there, Joe Copp, who lived to be 101. Oh. And he only died in 1991, so he hasn't been gone a long time. But he was very conservative, not only sentimental, but also very frugal in his, true Yankee way that he was. And so he didn't throw things away, he didn't change things. If something wore out, he would have it replaced, but exactly as it had been in his boyhood. So he didn't have any idea about the house becoming a museum, but it was just his way of doing things that preserved it so that would be possible.
And it sits on a beautiful piece of property in a beautiful section of town. And you have outbuildings as well?
We do. We have about 3 acres of land overlooking the Thames River.
I didn't realize it was that large. Wow.
And we have still the old carriage house, which is now where we have our archive center. And we do have other outbuildings on the property too. So it's a little oasis there on Thames Street.
It certainly
so I hope people will come and explore that a bit.
Well, I encourage all of our viewers and everyone in the area to do that. I've been to the home, and it is outside and inside. It's fascinating, and it really is, as I said earlier, it's such a time capsule. It's like walking into somebody's home.
Well, a good time to come and do that if people are interested, Mark, is on Connecticut Open House Day, which takes place in June. It's on the second Saturday in June, so June 10th, I believe it is this year.
Okay, mark your calendars, everybody.
And that is a statewide initiative to have historic house museums open to the public free of charge. And so almost every town has one, at least. Okay. And in our neighborhood, there are several. The Ebenezer Avery House on the grounds of Fort Griswold will also be open, and in New London, the Shaw Mansion and the Hempstead House. So people tend to come to an area and try and see how many they can visit on that one day. But we'll be open and it'll be free that day, and people can explore it.
People like the free.
And we'll have some hands-on activities for children to do, and just a few little extra things that we don't always have.
That sounds like a wonderful event.
It's a fun day to come. Yeah. It is.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier your season starts Memorial Day.
Memorial Day weekend.
So let's talk about a little bit more about what the season will bring this year.
Well, I brought some things to show you, and
we love show and tell.
I do have a show and tell, and I want to talk a little bit about the Thames River Heritage Park, and this is a brochure for it. Maybe I don't know how well viewers can see that, but you can go online and look it up too to learn more about it. Yeah. So the Thames River Heritage Park is a collaboration between at least 20 different historic sites that line both sides of the Thames River, and between 3 towns, or municipalities, I guess I should say. The City of New London, the City of Groton, and the Town of Groton all support this. And key sites that I would call maybe keystone sites along the river: Fort Griswold and Fort Trumbull, the Nautilus Museum, and then the future Coast Guard Museum will be part of that too. But there are lots of smaller entities like ours, like the Avery-Copp House, that are partners here. And we're starting to do events together. And I want to talk about an event I'm really excited about this summer, which is a harbor-based history tour. So instead of a walking tour of the neighborhood, which we have done in the past and will continue to do in the future, we're going to have a boat tour of
How appropriate, history. Because our area is all about the water.
It's so rich in maritime history. Yes. So we're calling this tour Whalers and Traders and Pirates and More.
Oh,
and there's a lot
how
more.
Exciting that sounds.
It's really fun. And so when people come on come onto the water taxi, it will be Jim Streeter, our Groton Town historian, and myself, and we'll be narrating this 90-minute tour that will stretch from Ledge Light at the mouth of the Thames River all the way up under the Gold Star Bridge to about the Coast Guard Academy. And so it's about an hour and a half of pointing out some of the historic things that are along the waterfront on both sides, and also talking about some things that maybe aren't there anymore, but what's replaced them.
Sure.
And how the harbor was used in the past. And so we'll start about the time of the Revolutionary War when we talk about Fort Griswold and the battle that happened there, and we will pass on through the whaling industry that had such a heyday in New London Harbor, and right up through about World War II.
So it's, you know, a little bit of a snapshot you'll be of what the waterfront looked like before it turned into the manufacturing of electric boat and all of that.
Very much, yes. We'll talk about it from its early beginnings. It has always been a comparatively important seaport, though, right from colonial times.
And this is a good reminder about how rich our area is with all these wonderful sites.
I think the challenge will be what to pick and choose to talk about. There's
so much.
Because you could be out there all day going on and on.
You certainly could.
But it's a nice way to give people a bit of a sampling and hope that they'll explore it further. And I find being on the water gives you a little bit different perspective. Sometimes things that you just don't think about when you're driving around in your car become really prominent when you're on the water, bridges specifically.
Yeah, and not everybody has an opportunity to be out on the water, and this is a great opportunity to say, hey, let's take a boat ride.
Yeah, and the water taxi is a great way to do that. So it's lots of fun. It's a nice way to enjoy the water, and the first tour that we're doing actually is in the evening, so it'll also be a beautiful way to experience a summer sunset. So
where's the best place for our viewers to go to find all the information that they would want to join you on this?
They can find it in several places. They can either go to the Avery-Copp House website, and it'll shortly be
which we show
fully
right there.
described there.
All right.
They can go to the Thames River Heritage Park.
Okay.
Or they can even go to the water taxi. The Thames River Heritage Park water taxi.
So it's very easy to find the information.
Yes,
very easy.
And if they forget any of that or can't find it for some reason, just call us at the museum and we can fill you in.
Everybody write all that information down right now.
The first one is going to be a Friday evening in June, and that's Friday, June the 16th. At 7 o'clock.
Oh, and June is usually one of our nicest months weather-wise.
It's just be beautiful, and a nice long summer evening, and we'll be departing from the Fort Street Landing, right on Thames Street, and going out for about an hour and a half in the water taxi.
And how many, I should remember, how many of those people does the water taxi hold?
Is it something
hold
like
about 30?
I think 50? It's about 35 or so.
Like that? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 40, but that would be maybe a bit
fairly,
of a decent amount
a decent
of people.
crowd, yeah.
And it's quite comfortable. It's a nice ride, not too big, and just a nice intimate feel to it. I like it very much.
Well, I know that the water taxi was very popular last year.
It was.
Everyone's excited to have that back.
And it also will be opening Memorial Day weekend. So if people just want to ride it across the river, you can do that anytime.
And that's coming up pretty soon.
We're
talking about. It's hard to believe because it doesn't feel like it when you look outside these days.
Yeah, all of a sudden.
All of a sudden.
So I brought some pictures with me
please
just to
share.
Give people a little bit. What I'm going to do is just give a few highlights of some of the things they might see on one of these harbor tours.
Wonderful, I love it.
And the tours are not too structured, so people are really welcome to ask questions while they're there. The conversation might go in the direction of what the passengers are really interested in. So, but again, we have there's lots to talk about. So I'm not sure the best way for these. Should I give it to you to hold up, or what's the best way?
I'll be happy to.
That one, that picture there, I don't know if it's possible to get in any closer on it or not. But so we're talking about bridges here.
Yep.
And when we're on the water, of course, the harbor is pretty dominated by the Gold Star Bridge span. But the Gold Star Bridge is not the first bridge across there. The first bridge that came across the Thames River was built in 1889. So not until 1889, which really is not awfully long ago as bridges go.
Right.
But because the river is so deep and so wide, there just wasn't the technology to build a bridge across it before that. And at the time, this was the longest span in the world, that bridge.
Of course, people know it today as the Gold Star Bridge.
Yes, yes.
But it's changed a lot since
it has changed
looked like
a lot.
this.
So it was first built not for people, but for railroad.
This looks very similar in this picture about what the railroad bridge looks like today.
It's very similar. So the railroad bridge came in 1889. Before that, when the train came to either New London or Groton and wanted to continue on the other side, there was a special ferry for railroad cars. And they would have to be taken apart, put onto this ferry, and then the train reassembled on the other side. So it was
been a long
incredibly
journey.
time-consuming.
Yes.
But that was the only way to get the railroad cars across the river until this bridge was built. And so that was a great improvement when that happened. But then railroads also kept making advances as well in technology and size, and they eventually became too heavy for this bridge to accommodate. So the railroad had to build a new bridge in 1916. And once they did that, the old railroad bridge was converted for automobile traffic, which had become popular by then. And also the trolley went across that. And people walked across it as well. And so that stayed in use up until 1943 when the Gold Star Bridge was built. And looking as we know it today, except it was just one span that had lanes going in both directions.
I'm old enough to remember,
remember that?
not back the 40s, but I remember before the second bridge was built.
Yes, because that wasn't done until 1973.
I was going to say 72 or 3, yeah.
So, and now it's finally reached the stage where it needs some pretty serious work done on it. So just being under those bridges, and you can still see the old bridge abutments along the side of the river, and it's just a really interesting perspective to see that from the water and to think about what a change that made with transportation when there was actually the ability to span the river. So before that, when people wanted to get across, it was the ferry. So I'm going to put you to work again there.
All right, here we go.
With that.
Here we go.
So
ferry.
There have been ferries going across the river since the 1650s. So almost as soon as New London was settled, ferry service began. But really it was nothing more than a rowboat at first. And then the boat grew as the population grew and as boat building capabilities increased as well. And finally, at one time there was a ferry that was powered by horses, which walked on a treadmill turning a paddle wheel. So, and then it became a steam ferry. And eventually this one here you're holding the picture of was big enough to take automobiles on it.
Oh, okay.
But once the railroad bridge changed, as we talked about, and the second bridge was built, and the old bridge became a bridge for cars and for people, the ferry started to become obsolete and eventually went out of service. And I think it closed down in the late 1920s.
Okay.
So, but before that, it was really a key form of transportation between New London and Groton, and used to go back and forth about every 20 minutes. And I often think how wonderful that would be, just to be able to, now we want it back, to be able to go down and just cross on the river and not have to worry about parking your car when you got to one side or the other.
Because so often, I've said it before in the show, is when you're on either side and you look across the river, it seems so close, but yet so far.
And it is. It's exactly that. It's not that far. But now with the water taxi, at least on summer weekends, we have the option to be able to experience what it was like to be able to cross.
What took them so long to bring that water taxi going?
You know, the coming of the automobile really changed a lot of things. It just changed the way people traveled. People wanted to be able to go wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and not have to be dependent on the schedule of a ferry or a trolley or a train. But with that came a lot of problems too, with congestion with traffic and parking problems and all the other associated issues that come with cars. So now,
well, even today with 95, sometimes you just never know.
So people have come back around to walking neighborhoods are appreciated again, where you can walk to get your groceries or whatever you want to do, and to be able to take a ferry to New London or from New London to Groton is a great thing. It's really nice.
It really is, because both sides of the river they're so different, but they both have a lot to offer.
Well, you can hop on the water taxi and go across and have dinner, or maybe you're in New London and you want to come across and walk up to Fort Griswold, or bring your bike and go for a ride, or your dog.
And visit the Avery-Copp House Museum,
that's
of
right.
course.
We don't want to forget that.
No.
So it's very close within walking distance of the ferry landing when you come across. So within 10 minutes you can take a nice walk down Thames Street from the water taxi and be at the Avery-Copp house.
And you know, it's a lovely walk, and they're not museum homes, but there's a lot of beautiful antique neighborhoods and homes. There's a lot to see.
And that's something that we'll talk about on these history tours as well, that the neighborhood of Groton Bank, named because it was on the riverbank, was a really popular place for sea captains to build their homes. And so their ships might be based in New London. Maybe they were a whaling captain and their ship would be going out of New London Harbor, but instead of living there beside the docks, they could live across the river, they could see the ships, but they could be in a comparatively peaceful neighborhood. And so the neighborhood is still really rich with all kinds of architectural styles, ranging from early colonial, a few. Most of those were burned during the Revolutionary War.
Oh, right.
But then all up through the Victorian era especially. So it's really a great neighborhood to walk around for people who are interested in architecture.
Certainly.
So we'll be seeing a little bit of that. We will be talking about the whaling industry because it was so important in New London.
Certainly was.
And New London was one of the top 3 whaling ports, sharing that honor with New Bedford and Nantucket. But during its heyday, that was the driving industry in our region, in our harbor, and lots of other businesses that built up to support that. And there was shipbuilding and everything needed to supply them, from sail making to all the provisions that the ships would have to take when they went out, and even a bank called the Whaling Bank that catered to people in the whaling industry. And that's where Mr. Copp, who lived in our Avery-Copp house, worked there. So there are lots of connections with that.
Whaling industry made a lot of very wealthy people, and a lot of them lived and built their homes.
It did. There was a lot of prosperity for a short time, unfortunately, of course, or maybe fortunately for the few remaining whales.
Right, yes.
It was not as sustainable
It was a rather brutal industry.
Oh, really horrible
really
from any kind of environmental perspective.
Yeah.
But you know, we have to think about it historically from the perspective of the people who experienced it, and to them,
of course, lighting your house with whale oil or something like that. I mean, you had to have it.
And so that was important here. And we alluded a little bit to the Revolutionary War and much of our neighborhood being burned at that time. And another thing you'd be able to see from this boat is Fort Griswold. So I'll let you hold that one.
Yep.
So most people in our region are familiar with the Groton Monument.
Right
that's there
big
at Fort
obelisk.
Griswold, and that commemorates the battle that took place there in 1781. And in the title of our tour, when we call it Whalers and Traders, this is where the trader element comes in, because Benedict Arnold, who had been raised in Norwich and was very familiar with this area, and was prominent.
You know, that's such a big name in history. I wonder how many people realize he was a local boy.
He was a local boy, and he made good, and he actually was a really valued member of George Washington's army for a long time, until he began to feel unappreciated and turned traitor. And
turncoat, I guess they would call him.
He certainly was. He tried to sell out West Point, where he was in charge, to the British, and that was not successful. But he then joined the British side and led the attack on New London Harbor in 1781. And he was able to do that very successfully because he was so familiar with the harbor, and he was also familiar with the way the local defense would warn of an attack. And it was by firing a cannon if enemy ships were sighted. One shot.
Okay.
2 shots meant that it was a privateer returning to port and that it was safe.
Oh,
and so
fascinating.
When the first shot was fired to warn the populace, he had ordered a second shot to be fired right after that.
Tricky guy.
So that would trick people to think that there wasn't really a danger, and that gave him time to get his attack underway. And he first sent soldiers against Fort Trumbull, which really couldn't defend itself at all, and so they abandoned that fort and came across the river to help with the defense of Fort Griswold. And Colonel Ledyard and his men who were stationed there held the British off for a while against tremendous odds, but eventually they were overwhelmed. And it was really a very sad occurrence, because at the time, those men defending the fort, they had refused to surrender, and they knew the consequences of that would be that no quarter would be given to them. But the rules of warfare at the time really didn't. They didn't expect to be massacred like they were, and that's what ended up happening. And it's a fairly complicated story. For the full version, you can, either come on our history tour, or if you're unable to do that, the Friends of Fort Griswold have a really great website that tells all about it. But there was a massacre at Fort Griswold, and most of those men were local men from the surrounding neighborhood and from farms nearby. And also much of New London and Groton were burned that same day. So it was really devastating to our area.
So much wonderful, wonderful history. And
so
as we're winding down a little bit, believe it or not, time flies
does go
so
by,
fast. While we have a minute or so left, is there any other events or anything that you want our viewers to know about the Avery-Copp House Museum?
Well, I'd love them to go onto our website and explore our summer events. We do have events for children as well as adults. And we are also always willing to take group tours, either school programs or other special interest groups that come to us. And so we can teach them about the history of Groton, about the history of our neighborhood, or if your interest lies more in learning about the Irish immigrant servants who worked there, we have a special living history program that focuses on them.
And of course, people can make a reservation with the group tours and things like that. So just check out that website. We are
there to help people come to appreciate the history of our community, and we really want to reach out to people to have them come and visit us. Or if you have an idea that you'd like to hold an event at the Avery-Copp House, if you're a non-profit looking for a place to have a meeting, or a Girl Scout troop looking for a place to have an event, we're here to help you. So just give us a call.
All right. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for being my guest
you're
today.
Most welcome.
I hope you will come back. There's obviously so much more to talk about. So I hope you will come back. We'll have you back again soon. So there you have it, everyone. The Avery-Copp House Museum. It's a truly special place. Please put that on your calendar. Remember, it opens on May 31st. Go to the website, find out about the open house day and all the wonderful things that the Avery-Copp House has to offer. Of course, also the water taxi, take a boat ride, have a meal in New London, visit the Avery-Copp House Museum, and just make it a fun day. I want to thank you for tuning in to Around the Town with Mark again. It's always great to have you. And we're going to have another show for you really, really soon. Thank you for viewing today.